Good morning and happy Jamhuri Day to you, celebrating Kenya at 55 this morning. We're so glad you made the time to be with us. The footage you've just been seeing is live from the Nyayo Stadium, where the celebrations are all set and in gear already. As you can see, various artists performing for the Kenyans who've congregated at the Nyayo National Stadium to celebrate this day. Falling snap in the middle of the week. We have our coverage all day today, so please do stay tuned to Citizen Television this morning. We'll be talking about what Kenya means to you at 55, how independent we are in all aspects, and just how much more we need to do for the next year, 5, 10, 15 years. So please let us know what this Kenya at 55 means to you. You can tweet us at Citizen TV Kenya, at Yvonne Okwara, or send us your text messages to the number 22422. Good morning and welcome to our coverage. I'm not by myself. We'll be showing you our teams around the country, including our reporters who are at the Nyayo National Stadium to cover these celebrations for you. All the expectations from the president's speech, including the fact that he's set to embark on a tour to what was then the Nyanza province, or the counties in that part of the country, starting later on today. So we'll get into that, of course, following that handshake that took place earlier this year. What's going to happen with that? Is Kenya finally moving forward from the election last year? And what does moving forward mean? Today, I'm here with Dr. Alex Awiti and Irungu Houghton from Amnesty International. Thank you, gentlemen, and happy Jamhuri Day to you both.
Thank you.
So we're asking our viewers today what, independence means, Kenya at 55, and, how independent are we? Irungu, let me begin with you. Where are we now, 55 years later, do you think?
So a number of human rights organizations actually asked 1,600 Kenyans in the last month, how far did they think we've come since 1948, which was when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. And generally the feedback was positive. 69% of the country felt that the country is in a better place. But of course, 1948 was a very dark period in the history of Kenya. Many Kenyans had to operate with passbooks. They were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to be voted for. So that was a very difficult epoch. I think what most people are concerned about now, about 50% of the country, is really that there's no equality under the law. If you are wealthy, if you have benefited from corruption, you will be treated differently by government offices and by the judiciary. And I think that's the biggest concern we have now, is that the wealth inequality and the corruption are really blocking this idea that we are all equal under the law, and also that we are all entitled to the basic freedoms and the rights that we see under our Bill of Rights.
And even as we speak about, you've talked about 1948, right. It was a dark time, the right to vote. Alex, some say, well, here we are. We have universal suffrage, in this country, at least since 1948. But some still questioning whether their vote counts. Whether that whole electoral process and the democratic process is something that all Kenyans can take pride in 55 years after independence.
Yeah, but first of all, thanks, Yvonne, for inviting me to this show. What I want to say is I want to pay tribute to the founders of this land, the men and women who fought and paid the ultimate price with their lives to set us free. And I want to remind the so-called powers of the 19th and 20th century that the biggest scourge in our conscience is slavery and colonialism, and we are determined to be free. So what I think is some of the things that we need to think about at this point in time is what have we done with that right to self-determination? Have we been faithful stewards of the commitments and the ideals for which we fought? Kenyatta talked about liberating us from hunger and poverty and illiteracy, disease and illiteracy.
Right.
The question is, in that aggregate, what we now call the Human Development Index, where are we? I think there have been some really substantial gains. For instance, since 1948, since 1963, infant mortality has dropped to 34 per 1,000 live births, up from 117. Life expectancy is now up 67 from 48 in the 1970s. Literacy is about 84%. We've almost attained gender parity in education, for instance. We have just the same number of girls in primary school as we have as we have boys. We still have ways to go in achieving parity in secondary and tertiary education. I think one of the other things that is also interesting is enrollment in secondary education. In 1970, it was just 16%. Today, we are over 70% in secondary education. So I think we have made some substantial leaps, but the question still remains around inequality, for instance. If you look at the so-called northeastern provinces, for instance, the counties in the northeast, we still have huge problems there. So the question really is the stewardship. The baton was handed from Jomo Kenyatta to Moi, from Moi to Kibaki, from Kibaki to Uhuru. Have we been faithful stewards? But again, in the middle, there's also citizens. What have been our responsibilities and rights? And we have the rights, but what are our obligations as citizens to move the? And again, all of these gains can only be solidified and consolidated by an active and vigilant citizenry. Right. It's just not for us to wait for the politicians to do something. Okay. So I guess today should also be a day to reflect by ourselves as citizens and say, where have we been and how
what part have we played
absolutely
in Kenya at 55. That's something Amnesty International also speaks about, quite greatly, citizen participation. And I like what you said about we have the rights, but we also have responsibilities towards the nation. I mean, if we are Kenyan and we're celebrating our independence, there's also a role that citizens have to play. And I know you talk about that quite a bit.
No, I mean, I think, we can say, there's been no civil war since independence. We have a literate, we have a hardworking population. Even when we ban matatus and the form of transport and we stop people from getting to work using their normal means, people still get up and walk. I mean, those scenes that we saw 2 weeks ago are really a testament to the resilience of Kenyans. We have girls who fall pregnant and they still go to they still go to examinations. They still try and pass their exams. We have families of people who have died under extrajudicial killings and unlawful police killings. Those families still go to work. They still go to their kiosks. They still do the things that they need to keep going. And I think today is a day really to honor them as well. I mean, they are our modern shujas, and I'm not sure if any of those are on the list of citations that are being read out by State House today. But I can think off the top of my head of people. Let's go back to Kibra this year. In June, July, we saw a massive destruction of 10,000 people's homes. All those people have not disappeared from this country. They weren't Tanzanians and went back. They are somewhere in the city. They went back to wherever they could find a place. They built a structure. They continued their kiosks and their businesses. Some of them are looking after our homes. And I think those are the people we really should be honoring on a day like this.
We'll get to the awards in just a moment because we have a list, and like you were talking about the citations, just understanding who is awarded and why and what for. Let's talk about economic independence, Alex, for a moment. We're at a point in time when we're trying to move really quickly. The medium-term plan 3 is in place. We have the Big 4 agenda. We have the Vision 2030. We're trying to align ourselves to the SDGs. But then there's also the huge public debt. In that sense, how economically independent are we today?
Well, Yvonne, this is it's a very difficult question. And it is easy to understand where the president is coming from. And all of these big aspirations around First Vision 2030, they created the broad plan for massive debt appetite. And then you have the president's Big 4 agenda. What frustrates a lot of us is that there's no clear plan into the long future around our fiscal strategies and fiscal policies. And if you compare ourselves with the Asian tigers, who were our peers at the time of independence, what has marked them different from us is that they have this extremely long-term vision. Some of the huge problems that we struggle with today, like for instance, the massive expense at which we created Thika Road and the SGR now. The question really is, what are we opening up the country for? What is the big plan to stitch together functional, sustainable, robust economic entities? How do we map the economic geographies of the country? And then what is the necessary infrastructure that stitches them together to then create that productivity and enables the economy to move forward so that we can actually pay our debt? Debt is not a problem. The question is, can we really pay for that debt. And there the question is, are we creating an infrastructure that is sufficiently productive for us to then be able to pay that debt? And I think this is where a lot of us who look at this fiscal cliff that we are on basically become very uncomfortable, because a lot of the stuff that we're creating is going to be idle capacity. The railway, until it goes to the DR Congo, will not hold the amount of cargo that could make it profitable. Thika Road basically has not created the efficiency that it was supposed to create. So if you look at all of the places where we've put huge pockets of money, these things are not productive to the extent that they can actually help us really pay off these debts. When these questions were raised, the president basically said that after we rebase our economy and remap our GDP, we're basically going to have more headroom in the GDP debt ratio. Well, that's a debatable point. But the question really, as we go back again, is the distributional elements of that GDP. So that the person who's bearing the burden of that debt actually feels that they're sufficiently enabled by the new economic infrastructure to actually be more productive. But if you talk to people in Nairobi, we're not productive. Any more productive than when we started incurring this debt.
And when we made these huge investments.
Absolutely. So the question really is, yes, economic independence is going to be a highly tenuous process. And it goes back to the stewardship as well. Are our current political class good stewards of the independence and the right to self-determination that we earned at the price of blood and life?
Right, and those that will carry the burden of that debt is the young population. We have a burgeoning population. You know this all too well, Dr. Awiti, from the study that you have done that has been cited 1 million times over. Well, over what, 70% of the population is young.
78% is below the age of 35.
Yes, I mean, that's
the median
close to
age is
80%.
19. Even by 2050, it will just be 25.
It'll still be 25. So there's this 19-year-olds now who are coming in. They're burdened with this debt that you know, they will have to pay, at some point during their life, for sure. And then you were talking about, Irungu, the sort of inequalities. And then you have the president's statement that, well, there's, young people and we've given them opportunities and, we've not been so pleased. What do you think Kenya at 55 means to a 20-year-old today?
So we know from the control of budget that every Kenyan between the period of, I think it's April and September, is paying 1,200 shillings to pay back the debt. That's every Kenyan. Now, that's not true because not every Kenyan is paying that. That's just simply what is the debt versus the population. So there are certain numbers of people, certain populations that are paying much more than 1,200. So the first thing is we are already paying back. We know already that upwards, as much as 45% of our budget is now going to pay for the debts the loans that we've incurred. We know that at the moment it stands at 5.1 trillion shillings, and that by next year it will go up to 5.7 trillion shillings. And by the time that the president is handing over the instruments of power, alongside the constitution, if we do not see a change in this, he will probably hand over a promissory note. Tucked inside, probably ahead of the Article 1, he will put a promissory note to the Chinese and the Europeans that could be in the range of about 7 trillion shillings. So this is the scale of the figure. Now, the thing about Kenya is now we've become numb to the word trillion. Right. It was like million,
and then actually,
And
billion.
actually, if I can be a bit facetious or a bit comical, we saw the coins being rolled out yesterday, and I watched the responses, and I don't have a strong position on the coins, and it's fine. But I think for me the question is, when you're talking about an economy which is hemorrhaging in billions and trillions, either in terms of debt or corruption, to release coins at a point like this left me, I think one of the smartest comments was, good, now we have a new way of a scratch card, removing the, getting access to our numbers on the scratch card. So I think we have real challenges ahead of us, and I think nobody's more seized than that than the government. I don't think that they are oblivious to this. The question is, at what point will citizens begin to express their will for a type of an economy that does not leave us indebted and with the kind of huge infrastructural assets that we are unable to use?
Is there a sense in which we're able to, do we have a thread in a story about what being Kenyan means? I mean, and I hate to compare to other countries, but you take a look at Americans and the French, and there's this sense of Americanism, if we can call it that, or being French. There's a certain tie to history. Do we have that? Do our young people get that? Do we get the Mau Mau struggle? Do we understand, what it is? Do we feel it here? When the anthem is playing, do we get that emotion? Other than when it's being played internationally, when we sweep the podium. But do you think there's that narrative that, has come, like a true deep sense of ownership, of patriotism?
I think there are moments in our national life that cause you to pause and just sit in awe about how great this country is.
Yeah.
And I think 2003, the first peaceful transition of power from Moi to Kibaki was one of those moments. Yeah. I think with all of its problems, just the triumph of getting over 2017 and the handshake was another moment that we could actually close ranks, come together as a country. So I think there are moments in the course of our lives as Kenyans. Personally, every time I leave the country and I return, I feel very, very pleased to be back as a Kenyan. And some of the places where I sit and you kind of start to game this thing with other nationalities from Africa, you actually believe there's something in this country that is special.
But a lot of people say that we don't feel that until we sort of go to another airport in Africa. But for the most part, I mean, the average Kenyan might not get that opportunity.
But I think when we look at our
when we're in here?
When you look at our neighbors, for instance, and I would hate to start pointing fingers, but this is a great country. Yeah. Irungo and I know that for the work that we do, some of the very vibrant, robust criticism that we put forth against the government, nobody knocks on our doors. Yeah. Nobody sends us threatening messages on our tweet accounts. Nobody calls us in the middle of the night to say, who do you think you are? So I think when we sit back, and I say this should be a day of reflection, there's a lot to be proud of as a nation, as a country. If you see the political class assembled today at Nyayo Stadium, and you see everybody coming together across the political divide, I think it gives you a lot of pride. And it's just that in many cases we take it for granted because we live here. But as you say, when you leave the country and come back, you feel, Jesus, this is a nice place to be.
So what will it take for those who may not have the privilege to travel outside the country and come back? Because it's very good. It gives you perspective, because when you go out there and then you know, like, okay, things are not so bad when you're in it. But what will it take for people who may not have the privilege to have that perspective, but still live, work, and die in this country, never having traveled outside, not even to the Namanga border? But then what will it take for someone like that who can then feel, yes, I'm Kenyan, who wake up every morning and say, I'm going to serve my great country and today's a good day?
So feelings are very deceptive, right? And of course, we all have them. It's like an opinion. But I think the most dangerous one probably is cynicism. And I think that's where we have to push back at people, because I think many times you start off with a cynical outlook, and then you assemble facts that just, confirm what you're feeling at the time.
Confirmation bias.
Confirmation, right?
Right.
So I think for me, as I keep saying to Kenyans, I've spoken to a lot of people who have suffered a great deal this year, whether it be from forced evictions or families that have lost their loved ones because of police killings, or police officers that have been shot by criminals. And we've talked to a whole range of people. And the one thing that I keep saying to them is that, you have to choose to be hopeful. Because in that choice, what happens is you can see the possibility of a new Kenya. And that gives you the courage to then go on and start doing things that would generate that. So for example, if let's go back to actually the 1950s, let's go back 55 years. Yeah. Between 1952 and 1956, the British government executed one man or woman every day for 4 years. Right? The death penalty was enforced. It was implied on everybody, but particularly on our nationalist leaders. Today, we sit in a country in which we have not executed somebody since 1987. We've had 6,000 people commuted, many of them hardcore criminals, commuted from death sentence to life imprisonment. That's a great thing. It's not happening in our neighborhood. It's not happening in the region. We have situations where the media, and we think about it, go back to 1963. Do you think the media would have had the same kind of space to share the corruption scandals of the white settlers? No, it wasn't the case. So we have a robust media that continues to put on the front page all the things that we need to fix in this country. And I think that's great.